Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast where we use storytelling and expert interviews to widen the lens on what it means to be a happy and healthy endurance athlete. We believe that athletes are so much more than their body, sport, and training miles. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders. We are endurance athletes, physical therapists, and huge coffee addicts. We spend most of our time treating, educating, and working with endurance athletes. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to More Than Miles. Tonight, we are very excited to have a guest with us, and we have Coach Jenny Breuer with us. Hi, Jenny.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm good.
Good. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and for braving the traffic to make it to our podcast time here.
We were just talking before we started the show about how Jenny is definitely our people, because we are all runners and are around runners all the time. And all of you listening know that we kind of just get each other.
Yep.
It's
true.
A culture.
It is. It is. I like how you call it culture and not cult. I think culture sounds much nicer. For sure.
It is a culture. I think there's so much that has to do with it, right? I mean, what we eat, what we wear, who we hang out with, our rituals. It's a culture.
Yeah, I do not take my GPS watch off for anything. So I've got a nice watch stand going right now.
Me too.
And here's my logic. So if I go out to the pool or whatever, I don't take it off, because if I do, I'm going to get a watch-sized burn mark on my wrist, and I just want to avoid that. So
That's right. My daughter has been part of a petition. She's like, I need Strava to add aqua jogging to the
aqua jogging.
Oh no, does that mean she's injured?
On and off, but just like she does it for just as a cross training in general, because we're in Texas and it's hot. So
yes, we can relate.
Yeah.
That's funny. I think actually that would be really good. I know anytime I did anything other than running and it wasn't on the watch, I would get mad, because if it's not measured, it doesn't count.
Exactly. That's her. You have to qualify it on Strava. You have to qualify everything.
That's right. So you have 3 daughters and 1 son, correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And so how old are they?
I have a daughter who just finished her freshman year at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and she's running cross country and track for them. And then I have a daughter who just graduated from high school, and that's where I was today. She's doing orientation at the University of Texas at Austin. And then I have a son who's going to be a junior, and a daughter who's going to be in 9th grade. So
I do not know how you do it. I have one, and I say this often on this podcast. I have 1 child, and I'm exhausted.
Yes. I've been exhausted for 20 years, I think.
It's true. It's worth it, but it's true.
Yeah,
right?
It is. Yep.
Well, let's jump in here a little bit. First thing we wanted to talk about, and we often talk about on this podcast, is everybody's running story. So you were an All-American cross-country athlete, and you've run for a very long time, and running has such a big part of your life. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about how you started running and why you started running?
Sure. Well, I didn't even know what track was. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, until I was in the 7th grade. And in the 7th grade, we moved from Columbus, Ohio to outside of Tampa, Florida. And I'd gone to like a private school, like everybody in kind of Columbus, Ohio goes to private Catholic schools, because that's the school system where it's a little bit stronger. And so we didn't have a track. We didn't have access to a track. We did not do anything running related in PE. And so when I went to Florida, that was my first experience. We had the presidential fitness test, and they made us run around the school a bunch of times. And I kept coming in like in the top 3, and I was the first girl. And I was like, oh, that was probably the first time I realized that I might be good at it. I didn't necessarily love it then, but I definitely realized I had something there. And then in Tampa, it was 8th and 9th grade was middle school. So I went to 8th grade, and that's when our PE teacher said, okay, we're going to the track. And I literally had never seen a track. My parents weren't runners. It was just kind of my life experience to that point. I played soccer growing up and been a gymnast. And we go over to the high school track and she's like, okay, we're going to do another version of the presidential fitness. And her way to see who she was going to recruit for the track team was make everybody run a mile. And if you finished the mile, you were a distance runner. If you made it 2 laps, you were a middle distance runner. And if you made it 1 lap, you were a sprinter.
Oh, that's funny.
It was really funny. And so that's how there was a couple of us that made the 4 laps. And so she was like, all right, you've earned yourself a spot as a distance runner. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I ended up having a couple other girls to run with and had a really good middle school coach who was Coach Toth. He was really funny, and he would just get us out there and started to kind of develop our love for running. The high school coach kept coming to visit. He'd come to all of our track meets and trying to recruit us for cross country. And again, I had no idea what cross country was. I was like, wait, kind of the typical response of, are we running across the country? And I'd never seen it, didn't understand. This was like probably mid to late 80s. He explained it, and he was absolutely a wonderful coach. And one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to be a coach because of the way he made running really fun. And so he kind of recruited all of us to the high school, and we ran cross country. And a lot of us would do cross country in the fall, soccer in the winter because we were in Florida, and then track in the spring. And that's kind of how it started. And I fell in love with it after that. Really because my high school coach was one of my closest friends and just really inspired my love for running and kind of helped us to see our potential. And that's, what a great coach does. So,
yeah. Where in Florida, Jenny?
I was in Brandon, Florida.
Brandon. Okay. I'm from Palm Harbor.
Okay.
Which is up closer to not quite as outside of Tampa. Yeah. And I just want to echo about the whole cross country thing, because I thought, if there's like nothing descriptive about the name cross country,
no,
like you can't tell that. I didn't even know it was running, honestly.
No, I didn't. Yeah. I was like, yeah, but yeah, Coach Zicht really, his name was Bob Zicht, and he really like kind of inspired all of us. And he's why I really wanted to be a coach, because I was like, he has a fun job and just developing us. And he was the teacher and a great, just a fun goofball pretty much. So then I decided I kind of wanted to go. I knew that I hadn't really reached my potential. This was in, again, Florida at this time. The girls were only running 2 miles and the boys were running 3. And so again, my coach was always adamant against that. He really thought that genders should be equal in their distance. And it changed, I think, sometime when I was in college, 3 or 4 years later, that Florida finally changed and updated it to everybody running 3 miles. But I only ran 2 miles, so I didn't know how good I'd be in college, and I didn't get recruited a lot because when you only run 2 miles, there's not a lot of times on you at that point. And I was okay. I was like, I think I never broke 12 minutes, but I was like 12:01 or something like that in high school. But I knew I just wanted to keep running, and I found a little school outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, called Belmont Abbey, and it was a little liberal arts school, and was able to go there and run and just continue to get better and better each year and develop a lot of kind of probably my coaching philosophy. I went in as an English major, and I was going to be an English teacher and a coach. And when I was there, I took a class my junior year on accident called sport management. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I had this amazing professor, Dr. Reedy, and I changed my major that day. I went to the registrar. It was a small school. You could do that. I walked down to the registrar and I changed my major and said, this is what I'm going to do. And he told me, you need to go to grad school if you want to coach in college. And he set me up kind of on that path to become a coach.
Wow. It sounds like you had a lot of good mentors along the way.
Yeah, I did.
So lucky. So what were some of the differences? I mean, you had mentioned just for a moment that the boys could run 3 miles and the girls were running 2 miles while you were in Florida. But what were some of the other differences that you saw between being a female and a male athlete while you were running in high school and then in college?
In high school, I had a really great, progressive track coach. Her name was Coach Goff, and she was awesome, but she didn't know what to do with us. because we were distance runners. And so she would kind of give us over to the men's coach, and he was really gruff and really like grumpy, kind of an ex-football coach or a football coach who was also doing track. And we got him to have a soft spot for us. He would try to give us less workouts, even though in track you were doing the same distance. He would not, he kind of treated us with kid gloves a little bit. And we would have to kind of go, hey, we can do what the guys are doing. It's okay. Like we're not breakable. It's okay. But that's about it. From high school, we were pretty equal in terms of the teams and the ability to for everybody to kind of be on the same page. Other than distance, the boys were running more distance than the girls were.
What about support staff and things like that? So now we know so much about the female body and how our hormones impact how we're training and, in terms of nutrition and diet and all of this. And what was the support staff like while you were training in high school and college? And did any of these topics come up regularly, or were they just didn't know about them, so kind of swept under the rug? Or
yeah, I knew about them because I was reading things. Like I would read articles, and I subscribed to a bunch of different, publications, and I was kind of aware of it. But like I didn't have a period probably for most of college, and I didn't get my period till I was 16 in general. So I was already kind of late, and we'd gone to the doctor a couple of times, and I found a really good doctor who was like, well, you need to have your period at least 3 times a year and you'll be okay. And so I just kind of listened, and I was like, okay, and I'm good. And so I did have pretty low body fat at the time, and I was doing a lot of things, but it just wasn't, I had a male coach in college and a male athletic trainer, and there just wasn't a lot. We were a very small school, so we didn't have a lot of support system. We didn't necessarily need it, or we didn't know we needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience to you, Jenny, in having a late period and going to the doctor and them not really offering any solutions like, oh, it's fine. But it's actually one of those things that like the earlier you address it, the better.
Yeah.
And luckily, I think, we're advancing in that arena, but I think it's still like one of those things that's just not cared for properly by the medical system.
I agree. And I had when I moved to Texas, I had a progressive when we were trying to start a family, and I had a doctor, and she's like, you don't have to stop running, but you need to find that sweet spot where you get your period and you're still ovulating so that you can start a family. And so she was really good about understanding that as runners, you don't want to just completely stop, but it's important. You need, she was really a good sounding board for that, and really helped to kind of normalize that and say, no, that's not normal for you to not have a period, but let's find your sweet spot, especially while you're not in high intensity training and you're trying to start a family.
Yeah, I'm glad you had someone like that to speak with some common sense and kind of practicality there. And any of the teams that let's start with growing up and then to now, do you see issues with amenorrhea and body image, and like what have your experiences with that and yourself and in athletes that you see and that you've worked with?
Well, so I started coaching when I went and got my graduate degree. I went to the University of Tennessee and was able to help with their cross country and track programs. And they had amazing people in place at this time. The women's and men's departments were still separated. So we had a head coach for women and a head coach for men in track and cross country, and in separate athletic departments completely. So we had this amazing staff. I was not expecting that, to go from a small school into a big Division I school, and to go, wow, look at all the resources they have, from academic advisors to their own trainer who traveled with us. And she was fantastic in terms of speaking into girls and saying this isn't normal, and this is what's normal, this is what's not. Let's get you on the right page. Because just the Division I atmosphere in general is kind of it's easy to fall into a trap where you're comparing yourself to someone else that is skinnier and running faster. And so we saw some of that, and they addressed it, not always in a way that the girls wanted them to. But the coaching staff and the the athletic trainers really addressed it and didn't put up with it, in terms of not put up with it in a way of like, hey, you need help and here we're going to get you help, or you can't continue to run. And for I think 1996, 97 area, that was probably not the norm, because a lot of people just swept it under the rug and just said, you're running fast, keep going.
I don't know if it's really the norm today, even.
It's not the norm today.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And so they were obviously ahead of their time and really taking care of women in sports, because I mean, Kacy and I talk about this all the time, and we talk to a lot of different people who are still struggling with this across all different age groups, whether it's high school, collegiate, or elite. And I think we're talking about running as a culture. This is a cultural shift that we need to make, and we've been trying to make for a really long time.
Yeah.
But we are stubborn as runners, and if we're running fast, we don't want to change what we're doing, even if it's hurting our body. And that's a really difficult mindset to try and train people out of.
Yeah. And I think the education is so much better now that the girls can look and see people who speak out about it, and they can say, oh, this does happen to other people, and it's, it isn't normal, and I need to fix it. And a lot of times back in the 90s, it was a little bit more hush hush, like people would just talk and not necessarily know how to address it, because we just didn't have the education that we have now. So
yeah, I'm really happy to hear that they handled it so well, especially back in 96. Because I have to say, usually, you're reading about all of these really like horror stories, right? And I know people listening to this podcast have probably followed the news with females distance running over the past few years, and people speaking out about being mistreated from coaches and treated like not even human beings from a certain degree. And so I have to say, hearing a positive story is awesome. My heart feels warm right now. I love it.
Well, I have to say that I was only there for 12 months because that's how long my program was. And I know it was always tricky, but I felt like the head coach that I worked for was not one to ever mess around. She was very progressive and very much like the elephant in the room. Let's get it out there. And I always appreciated that from her.
I'm sure. And I'm sure it impacted your coaching style dramatically.
For sure. Because I did encounter it in college when I was a head coach, and it was tough. When I was coaching in Division III, you don't have a lot of resources other than your athletic trainer to kind of help you and guide you with those conversations. And you're trying to have a conversation, as a coach, but also as at the time I was, I think, not yet a mom or about to be a mom. It's difficult to navigate some of those conversations, but the bottom line is that running is just running, and your health is way more important. And so that was kind of the bottom line, was like, you've got to take care of your health first, and the running will come if you will take care of the health and do all the other work.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. If we could scream that from the rooftops and people would hear us, that would be incredible.
Yeah, I know.
So what are some of the significant changes you've seen in women's sports from your perspective as an athlete, as a coach, and a mom of 3 girls who also are athletes?
Probably the number one thing, like I always tell my girls, I'm like, you have no idea. Like I watched Joan Benoit Samuelson run the first Olympic marathon on TV in 1984, and I was 11. And I was like, you have grown up this whole time with it's just normal that everyone runs marathons, and that women run marathons, and that when I was first a coach, women didn't do steeplechase. I don't know, they thought it was too hard for us, I guess. We ran the flat 3K, and women didn't pole vault. And so I was able to kind of see those things, evolve, when you're like, oh, women can steeplechase. Yes, if we just teach them, it's not, it's not the end of the world. They can be successful. They can pole vault. I mean, we're breaking barriers left and right if you just give people access. And so that's one thing, is just seeing, like, telling my girls all the time, like, you have no idea, like, what it was like and how things have evolved, and how lucky you are, how fortunate you are to be in a spot, where it's very normal. Like I always think that I got my running ability from my mom, but because she is like the world's best power walker. That woman can walk 7-8 miles a day. She's in her 70s and she can outwalk everybody. And she's amazing in that regard. But she didn't have access to any of those opportunities and, growing up in the 50s. So I always think, I'm like, that's where the running comes from in our families, because I know my mom has that ability. She's just never had an interest in running, but she's the ultimate power walker and no one can keep up with her. So
have you ever had that conversation with her, or have you guys talked about that?
I have said that a couple of times, and she's like, yeah, it just wasn't a thing growing up. It wasn't what women or young girls, she feels fortunate to have been able to go to college at that time, just because that wasn't the norm for every girl. And the ability or the wherewithal to send girls to college, in the late 50s ish, in the early 60s. So
this just, brings back the idea lately, women's rights have been coming up more again, as they should. And from my perspective, I think like your daughters probably have lived in this world where it's always been this way. And I'm so appreciative for all the women that have come before me and done the work and put their voices out there. And I never thought I would be in a world where some of those things were being questioned, and the conversations we're having now were conversations that were, being had, in the 70s and 80s. And so it is one of those things that you take for granted.
Yeah. And even I was in graduate school in 96 finishing grad school when the Olympics were in Atlanta, and then having, the women's soccer team win the Olympic gold medal, and then 3 years later win the World Cup. Those are some of the pioneers. Like, they filled 90,000 seats in a stadium in 1999. And it's taken them, ever since to get equal pay. And it's because we didn't have a female at the table to say. There was a lot of men in those conversations. That's what has been frustrating, I think, is to look back and still go, golly, in May of 2022, they finally got equal pay. But those women really passed down that need to fight and advocate for themselves with every single World Cup team that they passed, Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain and all of them who were really instrumental in Julie Foudy in getting them to listen that, hey, if we put on a good product, if we are good at what we do, kids will come. I mean, when I was at UT, this is in, 95, 96, there would be 15,000 kids and families filing in for a Lady Vols basketball game. And I couldn't believe it. I was like looking at those fans and summarizing, like, who are these people? And it was dads with their daughters, and it was families. And those girls couldn't go into the community without getting asked for their autograph in the mid 90s. It just goes to show you, if you put on a product and you give women access and they can get really good at what their sport, whatever their sport is, if you will put them out there, if the NCAA will advocate, then the fans will come. The fans will come.
Yeah.
So
I think you are absolutely right. And I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier when you said we need role models. As women, it's our responsibility to be role models for those that come after us. And we look to people before us to be these role models. That's and, right. Fathers, a lot of fathers see that and bring their daughters to events, and moms do the same thing or whatever. I mean, I always thought, I have a boy, but I always thought that I was going to have a girl, and I had all these plans of the things I was going to make sure she knew. Now, of course, my son still gets that so that he's a good partner.
Yep, that's for sure.
But it's one of those things. I think we have a responsibility as people with voices to put it out there.
And it's hard because so many, like, I know of female coaches who had to sue their universities in order to get equal roster spots and, get an assistant coach, get a full-time assistant, or get equal budgets. And because for so long, the athletic institutions were run by men. And so when Title IX happened and women were now sort of invited to the table. As that evolved, when the women came in, usually they came in as a senior women administrator, which just meant, oh, you can be over the women over here. And it didn't really give us a voice in the same way that we have a voice today. We have we're much stronger. We have, several Power 5 female athletic directors, which is unheard of and fantastic. But then you have, Sedona Prince, who had to use TikTok to call out the NCAA for terrible weight room at the women's Final Four last year. And that was in my hometown. And it's like, and I don't fault the local organizing committee. I think they don't have a lot of budget, and they've got to figure out where to use that budget until the NCAA comes in and says, hey, this is important. And this is vital. And we need to be on the same page. Thankfully, this was the first year that, they actually called the NCAA. They used the Final Four for the women, the branding, first time.
Incredible.
And why is that that shouldn't be on?
It should not. And actually, one of the questions we were going to ask you is, do you feel that female athletes are treated fairly or have equal opportunities as male athletes in the NCAA? So I see our answer is
yeah.
no. So if the answer is no, what are the other differences, and what do you propose we do as a solution?
Well, I think, like I said, having like Cindy Parlow at the table for the women soccer to get equal pay, I think that was very helpful. Mm-hmm. That was the only thing that really got people on the same page in terms of the men and the women kind of getting in the same room and having the ability to have a discussion about what that looks like and how can we get, I think Julie Foudy said, now we're on the same team rowing in the same direction. How can we do that in every sport? And why is the NCAA so reactive instead of being proactive? Like, it's the right thing to do. It's been the right thing to do for 50 years. Why do we still have 87% of the schools that aren't proportional? If you read the USA Today pieces that they put out, just such good pieces about the history of Title IX and where we are today, and we're not meeting the requirements, and we don't have a central location where a school can go and say, oh gosh, I didn't realize, we were 110 roster spots away. They realize it. They're counting, they're doing lots of other things, but, just to call them out, because even like what Sedona Prince did, she helped women's softball.
Yeah.
By getting that women's softball was able to now say, hey, can we have bathrooms? Can we have locker rooms at our national championship? I mean, she was able to do some of those things and help female athletes to have a voice, because, Oregon didn't censor her and they said, go, yeah, speak. And that's rare, because that's a lot of times people are afraid. They're afraid that the culture is just be grateful. And that's how I grew up. Just be grateful. Just be grateful for what you have. And so
I'm so glad people are speaking out, because grateful is not enough when it comes to this. I want to circle back for just a minute, because sure. Even though in the introduction, we tell our fans what we're talking about is Title IX today, but we didn't actually talk about what is Title IX for people who don't know the history of it. And you're the perfect person to bring this up, because you did your thesis in 1996 on it and your life living in female sports. So could you just give us a little bit of background for those people that don't know, or that maybe only know a little bit about it because it is the 50-year anniversary?
Sure. So Title IX was part of the Equal Rights Amendments in 1972. And they said that women should have equal access, basically. Initially, they said you had to have there was a 3-pronged test, and they said you either meet proportionality. So if you have 50% of your females at your school are women, then you should have athletic opportunities for women close to 50%. Or do you have a history and practice of expansion? So in that, okay, we added women's soccer. So when I was at Tennessee, they added women's soccer and they added women's softball. Somewhere in that time, in that 4-year window, they were adding sports, they were adding crew. And that was in the 90s. And so that's what they're looking at is, do you have a history and practice of expanding women's sports? And, that's probably some of the things that the USA Today called out was that, yeah, the last time you added a sport was in 11 years ago. So that's not really a history and practice of you. If you're using that prong as a check mark box, if you did it 11 years ago and that was the last sport you added, we're kind of getting in that in the weeds there. And then number 3 was to fully and effectively meet the needs and interests of the student body. And what that means, what it's supposed to mean, is that let's say you have a women's club lacrosse team or a club field hockey team, and the conference that you're in supports, they have a championship for women's lacrosse or women's field hockey. And you continually, those women come to you and say, please, can we go varsity? We want to have a varsity experience. We don't want to be a club sport. And they keep saying no, then that really shows that you don't have a history of meeting the needs of the student body. And unfortunately, the way that schools have kind of, again, they've done the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. And they've said, oh, we sent a survey and everybody's good. Oh. Or that's a lot of them have said, well, we've done surveys, or, yeah, we just haven't had a lot of people. But if you dig deeper and you go and you look, oh, you have a women's triathlon team that's competing at the club level, and there's, 15 women on that team. Why haven't you elevated them? Well, because it's expensive, and because it requires money, and all of these things require money. And that's unfortunately the landscape. It's easier sometimes to cut men's sports than it is to add women's sports. And sadly, that's, hopefully we're done with that. Hopefully we're at a place where people are getting enough backlash when they start to try to cut men's sports, because that's not, again, the spirit of the law either. Nobody wanted Title IX to say, let's cut men. That wasn't the purpose. It was just, let's have equal playing field. Let's have everybody be on the same page and do what's right. Give opportunities.
Right. And so that's some of kind of the dark history that came out of Title IX almost, was all the backlash and the way that they were cutting men's programs when Title IX came about, rather than just promoting women.
Yeah. Because they were trying to balance budgets. And, I'm in Texas. Football is king. Football is king in high school. Football is king in college. And so you're always trying to offset that football, which brings the lion's share of the dollars, that in men's basketball. But when you don't ever give the women a chance, you can look and see that when you give the women a chance and you don't put them on ESPN 14, you put them on ESPN, or you put them on, you put them on the same channel at the same time. I was watching the track championships, the other day, and they had the last weekend, and they had the men on ESPN, and then they had the women. We had to watch it in Spanish because it was on ESPN2, and we were at a rental house. We were on vacation trying to watch it on Sling TV, and we didn't have that subscription or whatever. So we're watching it in Spanish because the Spanish version was coming through, because they put it on a different channel. Still, you're like, come on. I mean, they put the finals on ESPN, but stuff like that just kind of, you're like, we're not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there.
Yeah, I wish everyone could see how much Kate and I are like shaking our heads as we're talking about this. I don't wish that anyone sees any of this on camera because it's Monday evening, but we are shaking our heads quite frequently over here. And you know what I think's really frustrating for me too is like going back to like the women's national soccer team, right? Like we were talking about, those girls were my idols growing up too.
Yeah.
And it's like, why did they have to be so successful and so good to get equality? Like, why is that the box we need to stand on? Right. And I think that's what's really frustrating. Because I mean, no, I'm not throwing any shade. Okay, maybe I am throwing a little bit of shade, but the men's soccer team is not that good from on a world stage, and they haven't been.
Right.
And the women have been pretty consistently competitive. And, it's just a clear inequality that we need to be the best to get equality when, all men have to do is exist and play sports.
That's right. And Julie Foudy kind of said, she's like, they've always pitted us against the men. And we don't want to come out and say the men are not as successful as we are, but they made us because they pitted us against each other. And the men were like, well, we didn't have to go to the table because we already had these things.
Right.
And so why would we complain? And anyway, I think that that it is a shame, but I'm thankful that at least that they're getting equal pay now. And hopefully that will translate into the WNBA and into some of the other professional sports for women.
I hope so too. I was reading earlier this week as I was researching Title IX and kind of reading all the articles. And I came across Billie Jean King's website, of course, who...
Oh, it's amazing.
It's incredible.
The pioneer.
She's incredible. It was really interesting because I think that she said that women's sports in high school have grown over 1,000%. I think it's 1,037% or something in high school, and over 600, somewhere between 600 and 650% in college since Title IX was enacted.
Yes.
I mean, if that's not mind blowing, I don't know what is.
For sure. And I look at, I have a career in athletics because of Title IX. I was a head coach of a college men's and women's team at 23 because of Title IX. I wouldn't have had that opportunity. I wouldn't have had that access. I think if the NCAA would just buy in, like they were the first people to sue because of it. They were one of the first, people they didn't want to have to deal with the women. And I feel sometimes like we're still in that loop with them. But if we could just get maybe some new leadership and some women again at the table who can say, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And I've been in a sport where, in cross country and track, I've coached men's, since 1997 or whatever. And we've always been like, our championships are always the same. Even if it's Division III, it's still the championships were the same, whether you're male or female. And so to me, it's kind of foreign to go, gosh, I can't believe that the women are still dealing with this in this day and age, that we can't be equal because it's the right thing to do, or we can't be, it doesn't have to be everything equal, but come on, we need to be.
It does have to be everything equal, Jenny. It does.
We're all human beings.
See, I'm already qualifying. I'm qualifying.
You are. It
just be thankful. Just be grateful.
Just be thankful.
I know. I mean, in our field, I'm the one at this point. Suddenly I've realized, I'm the one at this point who's yelling, no, you can't say that. You have to stand up for yourself. Come on.
I know. I know.
It's hard when you've been taught your whole life that maybe you shouldn't stand up, or you shouldn't be as loud, or you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, because that's not what we need to be doing as women. But the truth is, we do need to be louder, and we need to support each other more.
You're right. And I did have a lot of girls and women come up to me and say, I want to do what you do. I've never seen somebody. I didn't have a role model like myself growing up. I didn't have a role model. I didn't have, my daughters have just known me my whole life as a coach, and that their mom is a coach. And I didn't have any female role models really kind of growing up to model after. So when I was coaching in college, I would have a lot of girls come up to me and say, what do I need to do what you're doing? Even if it's not just in coaching, but in athletics, because, sport is so much fun in general.
Oh, it is. And I bet that was just a moment of gratitude, or just, wow, kind of looking back and saying, I didn't have this, but I'm glad I can be,
for sure,
be this person for them.
For sure.
Yeah.
And here's the roadmap.
Here, I paved it out here for you. Yeah.
I've even written all the signs right here. Go here.
That's right.
I feel like I do that too. And I mean, our field is, has a lot more women in it. Not as many women in the sports part of physical therapy, I would say, but that's the same thing. What we're doing is, people will come to me, and I think now you too, Kacy, and I'll say, okay, this is exactly what you need to do. And I take my notepad out and I write it all out.
Yep.
and I give it to them and say, okay, now go do it.
That's right. That's right. And you can go get a graduate degree, and you can do these things. And it's, unfortunately, it's harder for women like when I was coaching in college, it gets more and more difficult if you have a family, because you're just juggling all the things, and you're missing all the things at home to coach the girls and the women and the men, in your career. And so a lot of it's hard to hang on, especially in cross country and track, because of the 3 seasons going back to back to back, from cross country to indoor to outdoor. That was very difficult to kind of keep women as coaches for over a long period of time. I ended up going to high school because I needed to be on my kids' schedule because they're crazy. There's 4 of them and they're everywhere. So
everywhere. Yeah. I was going to ask you how you did it. We had a conversation with Sarah Slattery a few weeks ago.
and I heard that.
Yeah. And she's, just finished coaching. And one of the reasons she finished coaching was because she wanted to be more with her family and was having a hard time juggling that. And I think it's a very real thing. But I don't really know what we do about it. Do you?
Well, I was listening, the BYU coach, Diljit, she was talking about how the head women's track coach, she had twins, I guess, I don't know how long ago. And they offered to send a nanny on the road with her. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Wow.
I mean, I was like, that's fantastic. That's amazing. That's what you need. You need support. And I was never home for a single Halloween for like 11 or 12 years coaching in college, and missing Halloweens for my kids because that was our conference cross country championship. And I was on an airplane 3 weeks after I gave birth to my first child to go to a regional championship. And I had to actually go to and make a proposal to the president of the university. This was in 2002. I had no full-time assistant. I was the head cross country coach, head men's and women's track, head men's and women's cross country. And I had $8,000 to hire assistant coaches. So I'm just begging people that I know to come and help me after their real job in the afternoon. And I had to basically put a proposal in and say, if you don't hire someone, you have to send someone with these kids. Our conference championship that year, my daughter was born on October 17th. Our conference championship was over Halloween, 2 weeks later. And it was in Tennessee and I was in Texas. I was like, do you understand, you guys, do you understand that I'm not getting on the plane? Okay. I didn't take maternity leaves for any of my kids because I didn't think and this is again on me. I shouldn't have done that to myself, but I didn't have a full-time assistant. So I felt like my program would suffer if I didn't just go back to work and take the kid or the kids or whoever. But yeah, they hired an assistant coach for me for $8,000 and he was fantastic. And he came in and got on the plane and went with them to the conference championships because there was no backup. There was no backup plan. And all of my assistant coaches who I'm paying $1,500 a piece all had real jobs. And so they couldn't, I couldn't ask them to do that.
No. Oh my gosh. And that is the idea of having, there's so many things wrong with that story in my mind, by the way.
Yeah.
Not having the help, not having the money for the help, not being able to take a proper maternity leave, and feeling like you couldn't be with your family and you couldn't be with your team. And being pulled between. And I think a lot of women feel that way.
Yeah. And I didn't know any better. That was what you did because I needed to keep building a program. Each kid came along and then it just got more and more difficult. And I have a fantastic husband who is a true partner.
Yes.
But I took my pump everywhere. I don't think any of the kids knew that what my little black box was, but I was pumping in, I'm not kidding you, in port-a-pottys in Laredo, Texas, or it's so embarrassing now, but I didn't want anybody to know. But if I didn't have my kid with me, then, I went to Minneapolis after my son was born and for the national championship. And I think I took him with me, but I'm like, I can't, he was 3 weeks old or 4 weeks old. I was like, what am I doing?
My God.
You just do it because that's what needed to be done. And I don't know, but if the kids knew like the places I had pumped or the things that I had done that,
they
that
know
I'm like,
now.
no, I'm like, talk to me after you have kids and it was crazy. And just being on at a track meet and we left at 6 a.m. and came home at midnight and you're like, oh my gosh, like, without your child there and you're breastfeeding. And it's like, A lot of pumping and dumping going on during those years.
I'm sure there was. I mean, I remember going to an orthopedic conference, in the first couple of months after having my son, and I had to get on a plane, and I brought my pump, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to bring my milk back through the airport and in my bag. And I remember,
I gave up on that. I was just like, I just want to need to feel comfortable.
I mean, look, I think anyone who's ever pumped has pumped in very strange places. Yep. I mean, I used to pump while I was driving my car, and I really do feel bad for
that. Okay.
Everybody who was next to me that was.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, I know breastfeeding is a whole other thing, but like we don't ask these same questions of men, right? No, like we don't like, it goes back to like, if you see a woman out doing something, who's taking care of the baby?
Yeah.
Oh, is your husband babysitting? No, he's being a dad, actually.
The dad. Yeah. Yep. I know. And I actually I have a funny story. It's funny now. It was not funny at the time. My daughter was like 4 weeks old, and I brought her to campus with me, and I was breastfeeding her, and my office was at the very end of the hallway. I usually kept my keys in the door, but my door was always propped open. And so I closed the door to breastfeed, and someone came along. I mean, we're in a small school in Texas. Okay. Someone came along and stole the keys out of my door. I didn't realize it because either mom brain or whatever, but I didn't realize it until later. I'm going, where did I put my keys? Where did I put my keys? And I had her in the carrier, and I'm walking around, and I'm like, oh my God, my car's not here. They stole my minivan with 4 car seats in it. This was my 4th child, 4 car seats in it. All the little game, we had these little leap pads, all 3 leap pads. And my friend who was the women's basketball coach, she goes, oh my God, I just saw this guy walking around the parking lot with a clicker trying to figure out.
Unbelievable.
Anyway, they caught him but for 2 weeks I was without a van, and then I had no car seats. And I'm like, you can't make this up. I shouldn't be here.
You should have been at home. No,
I should have been at home.
Oh my gosh. Gosh, that's pretty incredible. I can't believe that. You just came up to your door and took the keys and left.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I guess he used to sweep through like the where all the kids would work out, and they would leave their keys on, how you have like a key attached to your ID.
Yeah.
And he would come through and steal everyone's credit cards and stuff like that. They caught him at several other universities, but yeah, my car was gone for 2 weeks, and that was rough.
Wow. That is rough.
I can't imagine.
Oh, funny. Well, I just wanted to ask one more question. Kacy, if you have any more questions, of course you can ask too, but if you could wave a magic wand, right? So to improve collegiate athletes' experiences or the student athlete experience and produce, productive members of society, what would you do? Like, what would that magic wand do? What do you wish for them? What do you wish?
Well, so I love the Division III model because, and that's not reality. A lot of times the Division III model is just that, no one is there on an athletic scholarship. They're all there because they want to be. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the most pure, because everybody's, if they don't want to participate, nobody's holding their hand to the fire. They're there because they want to be, and they want to develop, and they want to get better, and they want a chance to participate. And I wish, a lot of times my daughter got asked this question. She came back last week, and somebody said, is your college experience exactly what you thought it would be? She's like, why are they asking me that? And I said, well, it's because people are selling. They're selling a product, or they're selling something, and you get there and the product isn't what you thought it was. And I would hope, as moving forward, number one, for equality, and that for people to add women's sports when it makes sense, because it makes sense, and because it's the right thing to do. But number two, that we kind of go back. I feel, coaching in high school now, I feel like club sports have ruined the experience of a lot of athletes, and kids get burnt out by the time they get to college. They don't get to experience the same improvements all the time, especially in Division I, where you're expected to go in and produce or go home. that's not the environment that I work well in. So I know that a lot of kids don't thrive in that environment. And I just wish that we could be in a place where I know money is money and it's the root of everything. But it sure is nice to just cheer. I love cheering for the underdog. I love cheering for the people who are there because they want to be there, and administrators who are doing novel things and trying to add sports and opportunities. Because really, that's what it's about. People want to play sport because of what it brings to their life, what it adds to their life, what it gives them. The highs, hopefully you have more highs than lows, but there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. And the reason we all put our kids in sports is so that we can learn how to handle that and how to go out in the world and be productive adults that can handle failure and success and all the things in between. And the struggle is the struggle, but it shouldn't be a struggle just to, get things that should be equal. That if one team has it, the other team should have it. It shouldn't be, I hope that more male athletic directors, as their daughters grow up, they can really try to emulate what it means to be an administrator and put their dad hat on sometimes and really say, what is best for everybody.
No, I agree. It would be good if we could all get to the starting line in the same way.
Yeah, for sure.
I missed my opportunity when we were talking about like the first time a woman ran a marathon and things like that. And this all reminds me of the best April Fool's joke I've ever seen. And it was from Oiselle, the women's clothing company. Yep. And they posted on Instagram about the uterus keeper.
I loved that.
And it's like literally like a chic diaper. And it says, our wombs will be intact and in style, wrapped in our new color for spring 22, ovary orange. No more wandering around inside our bodies or potentially falling out during strenuous exercise or traveling in vehicles over 50 miles an hour. It's so good. Oh, anyway, I felt like that needed to be somewhere in the podcast.
Oh my God. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. It's so hysterical, but it makes me crazy that had to be a joke in 2022.
I know. Which one of you wrote the book on pregnancy, running while pregnant?
I did.
I ran through all 4 of my pregnancies and I think people thought I was crazy. And I was like, it's fine. If I feel fine, I'll walk when I don't feel good. It's not that big of a deal. But again, I didn't have a role model. I didn't have someone I just did it and didn't ask for forgiveness from my doctor instead of permission.
Well, in the beginning of that book, I wrote my story. And so my son was born, 2014. And so I wrote my story about how I had to switch doctors because even in 2014, my doctor told me it was too strenuous to run and I shouldn't be running. And I lost my mind. I literally lost my mind in the exam room and left. And I was alone. I wasn't with my husband at the time, which, and then I went home and I talked to him about it. And all of a sudden I said, am I wrong? Do I need to check myself? Is it my hormones? Which of course, as a woman, right. I hate that that's something I thought, but he was like, no, we are not going back to her.
No, it's true. And you're like, what? It's 2014. It's, 9 years ago, 8 years ago. Like, oy.
Listen, what I think that we definitely need to be equal. And in some cases, women are stronger than men. We're the ones that have the babies. I mean, come on. So how does that translate in sports without getting myself in too much trouble?
Right.
I actually told Kacy before this podcast, I said, I really hope I don't say anything I'm going to get in really big trouble for because
me too.
Because, I have a habit of that, especially when it comes to women's rights.
Yeah. We're all a little fired up about that in this conversation. So I think it's to be expected.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, Jenny, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Sure. It's been a pleasure for me too. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenny. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that it resonated with you and that you learned something. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps increase our visibility within the platform so that more awesome people like you can find us.
If you'd like to support us further, pretty please, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/morethanmiles. That's www.patreon.com/morethanmiles. Or for a few dollars, you can help the show grow and keep going, as well as receive exclusive perks like monthly Q&As with us. Until next time, remember to run the mile you're in, and that training is so much more than miles.